Before the Bible, before the Quran, and before the gods of Olympus, Africa told a different story. One the world forgot. This story begins not with a king, not with a warlord, and not with a male god, but with a woman. Not a queen beside a king. Not a helper. Not a mother of someone greater, but a sovereign goddess, a ruler, a creator, a destroyer, a protector. In the beginning, there were women who governed the skies and the seas, who stirred the winds and commanded the underworld. These weren't side characters in divine dramas. These were the main characters. Goddesses like Nana Buluku, the mother of creation who needed no male partner. Oya, the fearless warrior of storms and death. Aje, the invisible force of wealth and female power. And Nzambichi, the Congo moon mother who ruled over life, law, and ocean tides. These goddesses didn't ask permission. They didn't share their thrones. They didn't need men to rule. But if they were so powerful, where are they now? Why don't we hear their names in churches, temples, or history books? Why were their stories buried, rewritten, or erased? The answer lies in a tragic collision. When foreign gods crossed African soil, when colonizers arrived with holy books, and when the feminine divine was quietly pushed off the altar. The result? A silence so loud, many forgot there ever was a time when women ruled heaven and earth. But that silence ends today. In this episode of Afrocosmos 1, we resurrect the names they erased. We remember the goddesses who ruled alone. We walk through sacred myth, oral tradition, spiritual law, and ancestral wisdom to uncover the untold legacy of the female African gods who never needed kings. Because the truth is this: before patriarchy crowned itself divine, she was already there, reigning. So lean in, breathe deep, and prepare to meet the women who shaped the cosmos before the world was taught to forget. In the early centuries of colonization, as foreign powers swept across African lands, a profound transformation took place, not only in politics and economics, but in the spiritual currents flowing through entire societies. The worship of female divine figures, once a pervasive thread in many African cosmologies, was gradually, often violently, erased. Missionaries and colonial administrators brought with them a worldview that framed spiritual authority as inherently patriarchal, realigned mythologies to place men at the peak, and delegitimized feminine sacredness. Goddesses were desacralized or pigeonholed into subordinate roles. A fertility idol here, a village spirit there. But never the originator, never the sovereign, never the architect of cosmic balance. The result was a slow disintegration of worship systems that had for centuries honored matriarchal power with ceremony, temple architecture, and oral lore, all replaced with male-centered hierarchies imported from Europe and the Middle East. Yet beneath the veneer of this imposed spiritual order lay a deeply rooted alternative, one grounded in circular cosmologies and matriarchal logic. In many African traditions, cycles, seasons, birth, death, and regeneration were anchored in feminine energy. Creation myths often began not with patriarchs, but with a maternal creator. Fertile earth, flowing rivers, and nourishing rain were maternal metaphors, woven into the daily lives of people who understood that to receive, to grow, to balance, to cycle was to be part of the sacred feminine. Power was not a bolt of lightning, but a gentle current rising to reshape rivers. Authority did not mean domination, but connection. In this worldview, female spiritual authority was not marginal. It was essential, intuitively structural, socially integrated, and spiritually primary. Historical remnants reveal just how vividly this matriarchal legacy pulsed through life. In the ancient kingdom of Dahomey, priestesses of Nana Buluku maintained rituals that shaped political cohesion. In old Yoruba city-states, women held positions of power as Orisa priests, priestesses, diviners, and guardians of sacred groves, leading festivals that marked each turn of the agricultural calendar. Across the continent, in societies like the Igbo, Akan, Fon, and Fon Dahomey, spiritual lines often passed through maternal lineage, and these lines carried the consciousness of creation. Temples, now leveled or repurposed, were once places where women presided over rites of passage, divination, healing, and ancestral communing. These priestess-led sanctuaries attracted pilgrims from far and wide, all seeking vision, healing, and cosmic alignment. The myth of male spiritual superiority, that a god must be a man, did not originate in Africa. It was introduced through imperial theology, fueled by a patriarchal model then exported worldwide. Against this backdrop, it becomes clear how radically different indigenous African narratives were. In the original worldview, leadership was not segregated by gender. It was defined by spiritual resonance. A deity was honored because of her role, not her gender. A temple was revered because it echoed cosmic origin, not because it upheld male dominance. Knowledge was guarded by priests and priestesses alike, and authority flowed through ancestral elders without regard for gendered hierarchy. Returning to these traditions is not nostalgia, it is reclamation. It is remembering that power need not be centered in authority, nor moral meaning defined by hierarchy. It is recalling that, in Africa's sacred past, women ruled not as pawns to a patriarch but as cosmic midwives, river guardians, storm callers, justice bringers, wealth bearers, and death threshold guides. In the dawning cosmology of the Fan and Dahomey people, there exists a figure whose origins are so ancient that no male deity precedes her. Nana Buluku, the grandmother of the universe, is first among creators, the architect of celestial cycles whose generative power reshaped the cosmos without help, rivalry, or covenant. As the originator of all things, she gave birth to Mawu and Lisa, the twin deities of moon and sun, thus weaving the interplay of night and day, of feminine and masculine forces into a cosmic tapestry. There is no story of dominance or conquest in her myth. There is only the deliberate unfolding of creation and the wisdom to recognize when the act was complete. Unlike patriarchal narratives that depict creation as an ongoing process of ruling and conquering, the story of Nana Buluku teaches us that power can know when to release. After giving birth to the twin forces that would rule the heavens, she receded from direct influence, allowing Mawu and Lisa to carry forward the governance of the universe, while she maintained the silent gravity of foundational presence. Her retreat was not abandonment. It was sacred trust. Far from diminishing her authority, it was an affirmation that true power is measured not by perpetual action, but by knowing when the work has been done well enough to let others continue. Nana Buluku's symbolism as grandmother is deeply layered. She is not just a distant progenitor, she is a nurturing presence, a deity who taught the first lessons of balance and inherited authority. Her very nature reflected the cycles she birthed: moon waxing and waning, generations of life rising and falling, eras of masculine and feminine principle taking turns to lead, protect, and heal. She embodies cosmic rhythm, her breath being the turning of the stars, her patience being the unhurried unfolding of destiny. In the ritual offerings found among Fan and related Dahomey practices, one senses this layered reverence for Nana Buluku. Libations are poured beneath the moon, honoring her passage through phases. Prayers to her are offered before the morning sun rises, fulfilling the covenant she set in motion. Diviners carry her name in their chants, not as a deity of transient power, but as an enduring source of balance. In times of disruption, drought, social upheaval, moral fracture, her wisdom is invoked not to fix broken things, but to remind communities of their place in the cosmic cascade. Across the Atlantic, the echoes of her presence can be felt in syncretic traditions. Though Nana Buluku's name may not always appear, the principle she embodies persists: female creative sovereignty, cosmic balance, and the humility of leadership that understands its limits. In some Afro-Caribbean lineages, practitioners describe an elder spirit who emerged before other deities, who said, "I do not need altars of my own, my children will carry my power." This presence, though veiled, continues to influence ritual structures, moral rituals, and metaphysical philosophies within the diaspora. Nana Buluku's significance lies not only in her place in creation myth, but in the philosophical lesson her story imparts. That feminine power is not secondary, nor inherently subordinate. It is foundational. She emerges from an understanding of cosmic interdependence, one that places feminine energy at the grounds of cyclical order. She is not a female counterpart to a male god. She is the ground upon which duality itself rests. Without her, there is no day or night, no rhythm to life, no generative spark or ancestral song. Furthermore, her myth challenges the idea that divinity must be dynamic or visible to remain sacred. In her absence, she remains vital. She is still present in every sunrise and sunset, every waxing moon, in the rhythm of women's cycles and mothers guiding their children to adult strength. She reminds us that cosmic leadership is not always about action, but about presence and promise. The promise that creation itself is not abandoned to chaos, but held in the womb of ancestral wisdom and cosmic awareness. Oya, revered as the storm queen and gatekeeper of the dead, emerges from Yoruba mythology as a spiritual force, both breathtaking and terrifying, whose dominion extends far beyond mere weather or death. She stands at the crossroads where life ends and the ancestral journey begins, holding dominion over cemeteries and the spirits who dwell therein. Visually, she may appear as windswept, armed with her canonical sword of lightning, but her archetype expresses something far deeper. She is the power of transformation through destruction. Unlike a goddess of random chaos, Oya wields natural forces with purpose, using storms to cleanse, lightning to purge historical wrongs, and winds to stir stagnant energies. In Yoruba creation myth, Oya is often remembered alongside Shango, god of thunder and fire, but it is vital to recognize that Oya is not his consort or subordinate. She is his equal, occupying her own distinct realm of authority. While Shango is associated with male-coded energy, rage, power, authority, Oya channels ancestral rage, feminine justice, and cyclical transformation. She rules over cemeteries not because death is her sole domain, but because she oversees the threshold between worlds. She guides spirits away from earthly attachments, ushering them toward ancestral integration and harmony. As such, she is a psychopomp, a soul guide whose sword clemency cuts the ties that bind the deceased to trauma, fear, or incomplete purpose. Under her watch, the grave becomes a sacred passage, not an ending. Oya's relationship with death is not rooted in fear, but in reverence for the spiritual cycle. She embodies the righteous wrath of those who have suffered injustice, especially women and marginalized members of society. Her storms are not punishments, but catalysts of change. They break open dried riverbeds of tradition, uproot stagnation, and scatter old patterns to nourish new growth. Her lightning is purification, not random wrath. Her winds sweep away decay to usher in renewal. She carries the moral code of transformation, destruction followed by regeneration, embedding sacred justice deep within her storms. The 9 children of Oya symbolize not merely procreation, but spiritual rebirth, expansion, and regeneration of the divine feminine. These children reflect aspects of transition: courage, healing, ancestral memory, ritual power, and spiritual maturity. Each represents a trajectory of feminine leadership that cannot be reduced to the roles of mother or nurturer. Rather, they constitute avatars of transformation, rebirth embedded within destruction, completion emerging from chaos. Oya's legacy endures across the African diaspora, especially in Vodou, Candomblé, and Santeria, where she appears under various names: Oya Ajoto, Oya Iya, Maman Brigitte, and retains her fierce independence and moral force. In Haitian Vodou, for instance, Maman Brigitte presides over graveyards, holding knowledge of life and death with maternal fierceness. In Brazilian Candomblé, Iansa stands as the Oryx of storms and transformation, commanding respect as a master of spiritual alchemy. Across these traditions, it is clear that Oya's identity is not scattered or diluted. Instead, she holds firm, even as her name shifts with language and ritual. Her ceremonies demand both reverence and courage. Devotees dance with whirling skirts, steel themselves under drums, recreate ritual storms, and recite her chants. These rituals are not theatrical spectacles, they are enacting sacred power, allowing participants to feel Oya's force within themselves, the wisdom of endings, the courage to confront injustice, the resilience to rebuild. Oya calls this energy Iyanla, the cleansing fire of purity and intentional transformation. In historical context, Oya often emerges in stories where justice is denied, where trauma is inflicted, where cosmic equilibrium demands restoration. She appears when the heart of a community is broken, when ancestral voices go unheard, when grief stagnates in the world of the living. Her intervention is fierce, unyielding, necessary, and yet her power is not malevolence, it is sacred necessity. She does not kill indiscriminately, she heals through devouring stagnation. When she moves through the world, it is not to terrorize but to restore. Her storms clear disease, her winds awaken slumbering traditions, her lightning reveals hidden truths. As the Storm Queen, Oya invites us to acknowledge our own thresholds, where our past haunts, where hiding persists, where transformation is demanded. She is not gentle, but she is equitable. She does not ask for softness, but for honesty. She does not seek surrender, but reclamation. She is the blade that cuts illusions and the healer that remains after the storm. To remember Oya is to willingly enter the storm of our own becoming, to face ancestral grief with courage, to emerge cleansed, remade, and recalibrated into harmony with destiny. In reclaiming her, we do not merely restore one goddess, we reinstate a principle. Transformation is sacred, endings are fertile soil, and justice is a storm that, once unleashed, clears the sky so ancestral voices can be heard once more. Aje is neither a single figure nor a convenient archetype. She is the sacred force of feminine generative power itself, woven into the very bloodstream of Yoruba cosmology. In traditional belief, she is known not as a goddess with traits and myths, but as the cosmic energy field that grants life, fertility, and economic sovereignty. This primordial energy courses through lineage, especially maternal lineage, where daughters inherit her vitality. Bloodlines become conduits of wealth, womb, and divine lineage. Aje is the pulse of communal prosperity and the energy of creation in both body and spirit. She represents abundance in human reproduction and land's fertility, and in both economic forms, commerce, crops, crafts, and the rhythmic exchange of goods that sustains societies. Within Yoruba and related cultural contexts, Aje is invoked during secret meetings of women's societies, gatherings that could influence the movement of markets, the growth of crops, and the social strength of entire villages. Women in these circles pray, fast, make offerings, recite chants, and engage in ritual that binds economic success to spiritual discipline. These practices passed through matronal lines, and membership in these societies granted both privilege and responsibility. Women held power not just to gain, but to distribute. Their leadership was rooted in ritual authority, as well as practical wisdom. They determined which neighborhoods prospered, which crops flourished, and whose merchants found success, not through force, but through the spiritual alignment of the marketplace with divine order. Aje's power is not soft or nurturing in the conventional sense. It is sovereign, formidable, and intentional. She is feared for her capacity to disrupt prosperity when human greed, betrayal, or imbalance corrupts the flow of abundance. Her spiritual sovereignty demands integrity from all who live within her economy: honest trade, reverent birth practices, equitable community structures. She reminds people that wealth is more than accumulation, it is generative force. Aje wields her martial strength in silence, drawing prosperity toward the humble and withholding it from those who hoard or exploit. She is the unseen hand underlying every act of creation, trade, or childbirth. In her presence, prosperity aligns. In her absence, it withers. Fear of Aje's power is not malicious. Rather, it is reverent respect for energy that can weave destiny or unravel it. Aje does not punish for pleasure. She reclaims spiritual balance. For those who misuse wealth, undermine community, or violate the sanctity of lineage, the loss of prosperity is a spiritual correction. One hears stories of sudden misfortune befalling merchants who betray communal ethics, or of barrenness in households where disrespect for ancestral law prevails. In such tales, Aje is never the enemy. She is the mirror held to the world's face. Seek her favor, and abundance flows. Scorn her laws, and emptiness becomes the teacher. Economic prosperity under Aje is not random. It is cyclical, divine, and ancestral. Every harvest is physical, but is also a rite of gratitude, returning to the soil what was taken and renewing the covenant with the land, the ancestors, and the divine energy of wealth. Families whose daughters carry Aje's spirit know that each child born is not just another life, but another reservoir of economic and spiritual power. They are trained to respect the fertility of land and body equally, to treat merchants and midwives with honor, and to tend to the rituals that keep abundance alive. In these acts of thanksgiving, Aje's presence is invoked daily, ritualized through libations, gestures, and shared labor. In effect, she lives in every marketplace and every hearth where prosperity is cultivated with humility. Importantly, Aje operates through hidden infrastructure. She does not cleave to ostentation or malaventance of public worship. Instead, her power is carried in whispered knowledge, familial rites, and negotiated between women whose authority the world often overlooks. Her cult is not violent, nor is it Madonna-like sweetness. It is the rhythmic heartbeat of economy and lineage, silently affirming that feminine power is embedded in human prosperity. She is the generator of wealth and the guardian of economic justice. Where patriarchal theology demanded men in temples and pulpit, Aje's temple was the market, the village compound, the riverbank, and the womb. In forging today's understanding, scholars of Yoruba spiritual systems recognize that Aje's force has persisted under the radar even in modern contexts. Female entrepreneurs invoking her before every trade, women midwives blessing newborns with her name, market guards marking their stalls with her symbols. Her rituals have adapted to contemporary commerce, but never surrendered their ancient essence, sacred economic energy carried by the feminine, unfettered by patriarchal suppression. Her influence extends into Afro-diasporic practices too. In Brazil and Cuba, elements of Aje's energy surface in female orixás who govern abundance and fertility, in ceremonies that remind devotees that material and spiritual prosperity are inseparable, a bond first forged by Aje. Nzambichi stands at the heart of Congo cosmology as the luminous moon mother, a deity whose domain encompasses the tides, lunar cycles, and the sacred codes that govern all life. Though Nzambichi and Nzambipungu together form the principal creative duality in Congo belief, it is Nzambichi whose authority often eclipses that of her counterpart. She is not cast as a subordinate spouse, but as the central force, the source from which spiritual law, celestial motion, and natural order emanate. Her presence is woven through the ebb and flow of rivers, the cycle of the moon's waxing and waning, and the rhythms of human life, birth, and death. Through her governance of water, she teaches that life, emotion, and spiritual insight are fluid, reflective, and enduring. Nzambichi's spiritual influence is made manifest through intricate rituals and priestess-led ceremonies, where sacred objects are carried beneath moonlit skies, and the pounding of drums summons the pulse of ancestral memory. In these ceremonies, priestesses become living conduits for divine law, officiating rites that align communities with the cosmic balance she embodies. Offerings of white water, shells, reflective moon ritual cloths, and sacred oaths are presented at lakeshores and coastlines, where her presence is strongest. These gestures honor her sovereignty over both earthly and celestial realms, reaffirming that her motherhood extends beyond humanity to include all forms of natural life. Her energy parallels the cosmic balance upheld by Ma'at in ancient Egyptian belief. Yet Nzambichi's influence is not confined to the abstract concept of order. She is the mother of spirits of nature and humanity, presiding over spiritual birth. Legends tell of her birthing the Nenkisi spirits, called spirits made flesh, embodiments of forest, river, thunder, and healing energies. Through these spirits, she maintains an active role in the governance of communities, their moral harmony, and their connection to ancestral power. The line between Nzambichi and her creations is not hierarchical, but an energetic web: mother, created spirit, and devotee, all part of one cosmic tapestry. Her influence extends to social law and moral conduct. Nzambichi was invoked during trials, matrimonial disputes, and land agreements, as her presence guaranteed fairness, remembrance, and balance between people and the living world. Her priests and priestesses held the authority to declare covenants and punish transgressions. Cosmological metaphor merged with lived law. Just as the moon governs night, so did Nzambichi guide human paths in the unseen realm. Infractions against mothers, sacred trusts, or communal balance were believed to draw her lunar attention, resulting in spiritual consequences that held people accountable to both bloodline and cosmic lineage. Nzambichi's power resonates in Congo symbolism and material culture. Statuary carved in her image often portrays the moon goddess with one hand raised toward the sky and the other touching water or earth, an embodiment of her sovereignty over two worlds. Her priests carried moonshell scepters to open council meetings, and her altars were topped with cowrie shells and moon cutouts that shimmered in the candlelight of nocturnal ceremonies. Yet these representations were not static art. They were living relics, imbued with her energy during ceremonial rites, kept alive through dance, song, oath, and reenactment. In the cosmopolitan slave ports of the Atlantic Age, Nzambichi's presence crossed oceans, merging with the belief systems of enslaved Congo peoples in the Americas. Though often veiled under Catholic saints such as Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, elements of her power persisted through moon-centered rituals, water rites, free womb ceremonies, and healing dances performed at night. Enslaved women who invoked her presence described oaths of medicinal waters infused with lunar blessings, healing bodies, memories, and bloodlines shattered by displacement. Nzambici's reemergence in contemporary spiritual discourse echoes a renewed fascination with divine female cosmic power. Africans and African-descended communities are rediscovering her as a model for holistic leadership. She unites ecological wisdom with moral acumen. She demands compassion as fiercely as she demands justice. Rituals today honor the moon's cycle by gestating new community projects, ancestral receptivity, and spiritual healing during full moons and eclipses. People prayed in Nzambichi for justice, not revenge, offering moon baths and rice libations to cleanse spiritual debts and honor forgotten agreements. By examining Nzambici's central role in Congo cosmology, we realize that divine power need not belong to patriarchy. As the Moon Mother, she governs the flux of nature and spirit. She births cosmic law and holds every aspect of creation in eternal balance. Just like her counterpart Nana Buluku, she demonstrates that feminine divinity is not derivative. They are sovereign, self-existent, and foundational. Nzambichi reminds us that justice can be lunar, measured in cycles, forgiveness, and guidance rather than harsh finality. She is not a goddess of destruction, nor one of nurturing alone. She is the wise, unyielding custodian of cosmic rhythm, moral covenant, and creative transformation. In honoring her, we reconnect with an age in which feminine leadership was celestial, moral, and absolute. A governance not over humanity alone, but over water, moonlight, human spirit, and cosmic balance. Nzambichi is not an echo of lost power. She is a living guide, an invitation to recalibrate our societies toward holistic equilibrium, lunar reflection, and ancestral justice. In reviving her wisdom, we reclaim a vital component of spiritual sovereignty. The Moon Mother shows that divinity can be soft yet unbreakable, reflective yet guiding, cyclical yet purposeful. She is not subordinate but equal, and often primary. Nzambichi does not wait on men's authority or consent. She governs cosmic order, human morality, and spiritual harmony from a throne as old as the tides she commands. In remembering Nzambichi, we remember that feminine divinity is not hidden. It is foundational, luminous, and eternally sovereign. The erasure of these powerful goddesses was not an accident. It was a calculated strategy born from spiritual colonization. As Christianity and Islam spread across African lands, female deities who had once stood at the center of cosmological and moral order were deliberately recast, marginalized, or completely erased. Nana Buluku, Oya, Aje, Nzambici, and countless others found their roles rewritten. No longer sovereign creators or justice-bringing storm queens, they became footnotes, witches to fear, fertility spirits to placate, or at best benign companions to male gods who assumed primary authority. Temples that housed their grandeur were dismantled, repurposed, or razed altogether, replaced by churches or mosques that physically and symbolically outlawed feminine divine leadership. In some places, sacred forest groves that bore altars to Oya or Nzambichi were felled, considered demonic bushes, and relics of paganism. Ceremonies where women led, chanted, and danced under moonlight were criminalized or forced underground, becoming secret gatherings whispered only by initiates. This period was marked by a shift not only in structures, but in narratives. Oral traditions, once the carriers of goddess lore and ritual wisdom, were discouraged and undermined in favor of written scriptures produced in patriarchal ecclesiastical centers. Children were taught that God was a king, Christ a son, the prophet a man, and that anything outside this frame was backward or sinful. The matriarchal foundations of African spiritual systems were systematically denied, replaced with male-centric theology that positioned women, and divine women, as subordinate. Where once Oya held the gates between life and death, priests now preached of a single male God who absolved, judged, and defined salvation. Where Aje embodied flourishing wealth and maternal lineage, traders were taught that wealth belonged to men and spiritual power to male clergy. Where Nzambichi governed cosmic rhythm and ecological wisdom, the sacred moon's power was stripped to superstition, its ceremony dismissed as local paganism. Beyond the spiritual realm, this erasure served to destabilize social structures. Without goddesses to anchor their power, women's roles in governance, ritual, and economics were weakened. Power shifted into male-dominated political and religious hierarchies cultivated by colonial authorities. Spiritual colonization was thus also social colonization. It reduced entire systems of knowledge that held communities accountable to ecological cycles, female-centered healing, economic reciprocity, and cosmic balance. By stripping divine women of their voices, the colonizers replaced communal, ecological, and moral logic with doctrine rooted in obedience and hierarchical control, to obey male priests, male spiritual authorities, male kings. What had once been a spectrum of sacred leadership became a monochrome of masculine rule. This spiritual colonization created lingering patterns: the devaluation of feminine authority in both spiritual and civic life, the fear of women's leadership, the silencing of female spiritual knowledge, and the belief that divinity must speak through men. Reclaiming goddess worship, therefore, becomes more than a spiritual act. It is a revolutionary act of cultural healing and reclamation. By remembering and restoring female divinity, communities begin to chip away at the divides wrought by centuries of patriarchal theology. They begin to rebuild balance in ceremony, in narrative, and in social power. The return of the divine feminine is not a metaphor, not a fantasy, not a whisper lost in ancient time. It is the rising drumbeat of memory, calling back what was silenced but never destroyed. In this final segment, the truth stands clear like a carved totem in sacred earth. The goddesses were never myths. Oya, Nanabuluku, Aje, and Nzambici were never symbols of poetic longing. They were law, creation, thunder, justice, wealth, and life itself. They ruled long before altars were overtaken by masculine script, before temples were rewritten into towers of obedience. Their voices shaped rain, moonlight, breath, and the very laws by which ancestors lived. And though their names were buried under centuries of conquest, missionary ink, and colonial erasure, they still live, because power this deep cannot die. The invitation now is not only to remember, but to restore, to open the gates of the sacred again, to speak their names aloud, and make space in our lives for their return. Reclaiming Oya means reclaiming righteous rage, the power to destroy what no longer serves and rise from the ruins. Honoring Nana Buluku is to recognize the original cosmic womb, the one that created and then rested, not out of weakness, but out of divine sufficiency. Aje calls us to honor the sacred economy of life, the generative force that sustains lineage and prosperity through balance, not greed. And Nzambichi, our moon mother, reminds us that wisdom is cyclic, law is spiritual, and divine authority need not shout, it simply is. This is a return not to nostalgia, but to truth. The stories of these goddesses were not poetic exaggerations. They were systems of governance, ecological intelligence, moral education, and community cohesion. Their memory is not just cultural, it is spiritual technology. In bringing them forward, we do not romanticize femininity. We restore its original seat at the center of the cosmos. They ruled not beside men, but before them. Not as shadows of divine order, but as its first and fiercest voice. So we leave you now with a choice: to scroll away into forgetting, or to sit for one breath longer in sacred remembrance. If you hear the echo of the feminine divine in your spirit, type "I remember her." Let it be a spell, a signal, a vow. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to walk with goddesses again. Comment her name. Share this video with someone whose ancestors once danced in her temples. This is not just content, it is consecration. These women ruled before the throne was shared. Let us honor them, not as lost queens, but as the voices who made the world.